When you hear the name Leonard Nimoy, it's hard not to think about Mr. Spock, the half-Vulcan, half-human science officer that he played on the classic TV show Star Trek, which aired on NBC for 3 seasons during the late 60s. At the core of that show were 3 characters that drove many of the stories during the show's initial run: Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and the actors who played them had such great chemistry together. I really grew to love these characters, but you know what? They weren't the only ones. In fact, I really grew to love the entire cast of the show. Each one of these characters were well developed and, most importantly, interesting and fun to watch. When NBC canceled the show after a letter writing campaign that saved the show from almost certain cancellation after the 2nd season, fans thought that they might be saying live long and prosper to these characters forever. And I think some of the cast members did as well. In fact, after the show's cancellation, Nimoy quickly jumped from Trek to another popular show of the era, Mission Impossible, which was airing on CBS. Leonard co-starred on that show during its 4th and 5th seasons as Paris, an ex-magician and makeup expert. I remember watching Mission Impossible reruns in the mid-70s, and whenever an episode where Paris appeared, I'd think to myself, wow, he looks so strange without those trademark pointy ears. After Mission Impossible ran its course, Nimoy continued to find steady work in both TV shows and television movies. Among the shows that Nimoy guest starred in was Rod Serling's follow-up to The Twilight Zone, another anthology program titled Night Gallery. In fact, it was on Night Gallery where Nimoy got his start as a director, on an episode about modern-day vampires titled Death on a Barge. So with all that said, let's talk for a minute or two about the animated version of Star Trek. I still remember when this show premiered during the fall of 1973. I was so excited for Star Trek to be back. Little did I know about the drama that had actually taken place behind the scenes during the show's development. You see, apparently Roddenberry and team did not feel like the budget allocated for the new program was substantial enough to bring back all of the original cast members. Because of that, new characters were created: Lieutenants Maress and Arex. Maress, voiced by Roddenberry's wife Majel Barrett, would be the ship's new communications officer, and Lieutenant Arex was a navigations officer and would be voiced by Lieutenant Commander Scott himself, James Doohan. With these 2 new characters being voiced by actors who had already signed on to the show, it appeared that there would be no need to bring back Nichelle Nichols to voice Lieutenant Uhura or George Takei to voice Mr. Sulu. And poor Walter Koenig, Chekhov was apparently cast aside without even an effort to replace him with a new, more fantastical animated character. Yep, it seemed like a good plan. A plan that would allow the show to come in on budget and keep everyone involved with the show happy. And yet, there was someone who was not pleased. As you might have already guessed based on the title of this video, I'm talking about Leonard Nimoy. Everyone knew that for the new animated version of the show to be a success, it would require the presence of Mr. Spock. Everyone knew it, including Nimoy, who made it abundantly clear that if he were to be involved, so would Nichelle, George, and yes, even Walter. And just like that, don't ask me how it happened, Lieutenant Uhura and Mr. Sulu were back on board the Starship Enterprise. Yep, that's a much better looking crew, although I still can't see Chekhov anywhere. And that's because ultimately one concession was made. Kain Egg would not return to the show. Instead, he would be given an opportunity to participate in the new program by writing one of the episodes, titled The Infinite Vulcan. Although he was upset at not being included in the animated version of the show, Kain Egg has the distinction of being the first cast member to write a Star Trek story for television. Ultimately, Walter, Nichelle, and George were extremely grateful to Leonard for his willingness to take a stand for his friends. Maybe it wasn't that big of a risk taken on his part, but you know what? I don't know if that really matters. The fact of the matter is that when things weren't looking great for his friends, Leonard Nimoy stood up for them. An act of loyalty that I have to believe was never forgotten. Also never forgotten is this little treasure. Mr. Spock's Time Trek on 3 Viewmaster reels. Based on the animated episode Yesteryear, written by the great DC Fontana, this story is one of my favorites from the series, and my little Viewmaster allowed me to watch it over and over. Another way I was able to relive the episodes were the Star Trek logbooks, written by Alan Dean Foster. They were absolutely fantastic adaptations of the animated Trek episodes. Along with the James Blish novelizations of the original series, I had them all, and I would reread the adventures of the crew of the Starship Enterprise whenever I could. Speaking of Alan Dean Foster, this book right here is still one of my favorite Star Wars stories. If Star Wars had not been the mega blockbuster hit that it was in 1977, there was talk about using this story for the follow-up instead of The Empire Strikes Back. Splinter of the Mind's Eye could have been produced for a fraction of the cost of the original film due to a smaller cast and a story that wasn't exactly special effects heavy. And as long as we're talking about books and Leonard Nimoy, it's probably worth mentioning this book. You know, I was aghast when I first saw this thing. It was published right after the animated version of Star Trek, and it seems that there was this brief moment in time when Leonard Nimoy didn't want to fully embrace the fact that millions of Americans would forever see him as loyal, brave, and mostly emotionless Mr. Spock. Fortunately for all of us, it wouldn't be all that long before Leonard realized the error of his ways and course-corrected with this wonderful book, a positive affirmation that he was indeed Mr. Spock. So that's it. What do you think? Are you surprised that it was Nimoy and not Shatner that ultimately went to bat for his fellow cast members? I'm a big fan of William Shatner's, but I have to say that I'm not all that surprised. Still, let me know what you think in the comments section, and while you're at it, I'd love a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and I would be absolutely honored if you would consider subscribing to my little YouTube channel. I talk about music, movies, and television, mostly from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. You know, the good stuff. But most importantly, and as always, thank you so much for watching.